you know, we lived in a kind of gated community, a gated house actually, and really seriously gated. But we used to go around, my brothers and I used to go around down the lane, we get out of there. But walking to school, what I only saw was these long gray stone buildings. The Institute of Philosophy along Pine Avenue, and I guess also the Grey Nuns 19th century building, and I just thought they were wonderful. Mm. And so that was my, and I loved also the landscape, because there was sort of great fields. I guess that's still filled in. It's kept. It was just at the foot of the mountain, so I think that gave me a great sense of space, of materiality, and of moving on foot, knowing the city by moving on foot. I never really thought he was my father. I mean, he was the architect I worked with and whose logic I really absorbed and thought about. And from the history course I took, which I found quite interesting, I wanted to sort of get a sense of what it is on the ground. And so I thought, well, I'll go to Montreal and take a look at this. I asked Richard Pear, who I'd met, who was a young photographer from England, who was doing his master's, I guess, at the Art Institute of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And so I said, come on up to Montreal over the holidays, and we'll do some photographing. And that lasted from 72 to 74, I guess. And so that brought me back to Montreal, I guess, when I first started looking at Montreal again. Because when I went back, I lived in this gated area and hardly knew the rest of the city. And I found that when friends of mine came to Expo 67, while I was doing the City Profit Center, that I was always showing them the Greystone building areas. And so then I started photographing them. I kept the name because I wanted to be on my own, and so it was fine. I just didn't want the association that, you know, my friends were artists. They were left-wing people who, and it has nothing to do with the way my family works. I mean, they do lots of good things, but it's just not my kind of thing to do. And so I wanted to be on my own. I was very privileged. And that, of course, is always true of early women who made it. You know, I'm still in the early stages of the present. And so when I went to architectural school, there were 2 other women. And at Yale, I was told by Melvin Charney that I was going to shock everybody, because the men's room was on the same floor as where we had our drafting tables. But for women, you had to go to another woman and get a key and go downstairs. So I refused to do that. So I'd go into the men's room and sing. And people knew I was there, so they could do what they wanted to do. At least they knew I was there. But, you know, it's just, anyway, that was the way it was. Well, feminist, I never thought in that way. You know, as I mentioned earlier to you, I played with my brothers. I played baseball. I played touch ball, and I went hockey skating with them. I met Gail Lenti when Joseph Rickward, who was a great friend of mine, and he took me to her studio in Mendon, was it? Yes, and so, you know, I was sort of timid, and I sort of said yes, but I also saw that building being transformed because the head of the director of the Galdosny in architecture was on our committee of ICAM, and so we all went and we all visited it. So that was kind of interesting to see that transformation. I knew Ada Louise much better. I can't quite remember when I met her, and but I remember she wanted to put me up for some club or something at some point, but you know, those clubs in New York. But she, I remember quite well when she was fairly frail, and there was a meeting of the institute, Architectural Society of Architectural Historians, and their annual meeting, and I sort of escorted her around and made sure that she was comfortable, things like that. She was very, very nice, and so we knew each other reasonably well. And also, initially, her husband was the person who, and I think she helped him with it, designed the reception plate in front of people for the Four Seasons. So that was a connection also. Okay, before I say that, I do want to say I thought men and women were the same, and I didn't see why there was any special difference. But that's because I was privileged. You know, when I worked, well, this is something about agency, but when I worked at Seagram, you know, because I had been the head of planning, director of planning, and because I was also my father's daughter, if I said this room is orange, and they'd say, yes, Mrs. Lambert. You know, it was just sort of very unequal kind of thing. So the only time I ran into that was with Jean Summers, when we were doing the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles, and we go to see the mayor, because obviously one had to do this in relationship. You know, to bring back the Biltmore was a big deal then, because that whole area had been condemned, and so people would think I was his secretary, Jean Summers' secretary, but you know, you can't worry about that too much. Or when I was on the site of the Sadie Bronfman Center photographing, and the men all thought that I was just a photographer, just you know, taking photographs. Well, I think to a certain extent, I think the women have always had a more human role because of the very nature of their bodies and their function of their bodies. And I think we were all outsiders. You know, we were never at the center of being told, you know, we had to fight for what we wanted, or we had to push for what we wanted, or to convince for what we wanted. And I think that's a very big difference